In 1943, the skies above the Pacific were ruled by Japan. Their Zero fighter, fast, elegant, invincible, had crushed every opponent that dared to rise against it. But that year, a new machine appeared on the horizon. A fighter heavier than any Japan had ever faced, built not for grace, but for survival. It was called the F6F Hellcat. And within 2 years, it would erase Japan's air supremacy, forever. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai paused over an intelligence report, his one good eye scanning the words that made him laugh in the thick, humid air of Rabaul. The Americans have produced a new fighter, heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport. They call it the Hellcat. Sakai chuckled. Another American blunder, he thought. The report claimed it weighed twice as much as Japan's sleek A6M0. Through the tent flaps, rows of Zeros shimmered in the heat, elegant, agile, undefeated. For 2 years, these aircraft had ruled the skies from Pearl Harbor to the Philippines. Hurricanes, Warhawks, Buffaloes, all had fallen before their guns. To Sakai and every pilot under his command, the Zero was perfection itself. And this new Hellcat? Surely just another overbuilt American mistake. But what Sakai didn't know, what none of the laughing pilots in that tent could imagine, was that within 30 days, the skies above the Pacific would change forever. The Hellcat, born in American shipyards and assembly lines, would soon dismantle Japan's proud air arm, rewriting every rule of aerial warfare. Since December 7, 1941, Japan's naval aviators had lived by one unshakable truth: the Zero was invincible. At Pearl Harbor, 29 Japanese planes were lost, but 347 Allied aircraft were destroyed. In the Philippines, 7 losses for over 100 enemy kills. In the skies over Darwin, 2 Zeros down, 30 defenders gone. The Zero's design defied physics, the range of a bomber, the agility of a biplane, and the firepower of a cannon. When American engineers first tested a captured Zero, they couldn't believe the numbers. "A fighter this light shouldn't exist," one engineer wrote. Made from extra super duralumin, a secret alloy 30% lighter than anything the Americans used, the Zero stripped away armor, radios, even fuel protection. Every ounce saved meant more maneuverability, more speed, more dominance. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Japan's top ace, once wrote, "Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. It moves as you think, not as you command." To the Japanese, the Zero was art. To the Americans, it was a nightmare. Early in 1943, Japanese intelligence intercepted details of America's new fighter, the F6F Hellcat. Its specifications were absurd: 12,000 pounds loaded, double the Zero. A bulky radial engine. Armor plating everywhere. Self-sealing tanks, bulletproof glass, heavy guns, heavy wings. At Combined Fleet Headquarters, Captain Minoru Genda, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, reviewed the data. His verdict: the Americans have learned nothing. The Zero will fly circles around it. On paper, he was right. The Zero's light frame gave it an unmatched turning radius, 612 feet. The Hellcat's heavy body meant over 900 feet. In a turning dogfight, the Hellcat would be helpless. At least, that's what they thought. Petty Officer Yoshio Fukui spotted 6 dark blue aircraft climbing toward him. B-25 bombers, he wondered. Then they turned, and he saw, single engine, massive fuselage, short wings. A new fighter. The Hellcat. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, the move that always worked. The Zero could outturn anything. But the Hellcat didn't follow. It went vertical, straight up. Its 2,000 horsepower double Wasp engine dragged it skyward like a rocket. Fukui tried to follow, but his Zero began to stall. Then, impossibly, the Hellcat pivoted mid-air, a hammerhead turn, and dropped onto his tail. 6 guns, he wrote later. Not 4, 6. The fire was unbelievable. His Zero was shredded. He barely made it back to Marcus Island. His wingman didn't. The Hellcat had drawn first blood. 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group climbed to intercept another American raid. Their leader, Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga, was confident we held every advantage: altitude, surprise, and numbers. Below them, 12 Hellcats moved in tight formation. The Japanese dove first. The Hellcats didn't scatter or panic. They held formation, diving gently to build speed. The first bursts from the Zeros hit home, sparks and smoke, but the American planes kept flying. Armor. Bulletproof glass. Self-sealing tanks. The very weight that Japanese pilots mocked was now saving American lives. Then the Hellcats counterattacked. They didn't turn to fight, they dove, fired, climbed away, then dove again. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcats still had power. The Zeros gasped for air. Shiga later wrote, "They came down on us like hawks on sparrows." 8 Zeros were destroyed. No Hellcats were lost. The myth of Japanese air superiority cracked that day over Wake Island. Lieutenant Commander Tetsuo Tanamizu, with 32 victories to his name, faced his squadron. His tone was grim. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he told them. "The Americans have changed the rules." He described the new style of fighting, energy combat. Hellcat pilots didn't dogfight. They controlled altitude and speed, attacking in powerful slashing passes. They worked in pairs, using radios to coordinate every move. "One fighter high, one low. We fight as samurai," Tanamizu said. "They fight as a machine." It was a sobering warning. Few who heard it would live to see 1944. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda, who had once shouted, "Tora! Tora! Tora!" over Pearl Harbor, now inspected damaged Zeros returning from battle. What he saw chilled him. The Hellcat's firepower was staggering. 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, 4,500 rounds per minute, each bullet striking with the force of a hammer. The Zeros' lightweight guns couldn't compare. Even worse, the Americans were no longer fighting blind. Shipboard radar guided Hellcats to intercept Japanese formations before they were even visible. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described his terror: "They hit us through clouds. No warning. They knew our altitude, our heading, everything." The Japanese were fighting men. The Americans were fighting with machines. The once elite Japanese pilot corps was collapsing. Before the war, Navy pilots trained for 3 years, 700 flight hours before combat. They were masters of the air. By 1944, fuel shortages and desperation had gutted the system. Trainees got 200 hours, sometimes less. Many had never fired a live round. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto wrote in despair, "We are sending children to fight professionals." He recalled one young pilot, Ensign Yamamoto, who arrived at the front without ever firing his guns in flight. He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat. The Americans, meanwhile, were turning out thousands of trained aviators, every one drilled in formation flying, energy tactics, and carrier landings. The balance had shifted. Skill could no longer compensate for numbers. When American carriers struck Formosa, Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome committed everything he had, over 700 aircraft. Japanese broadcasts declared victory, 26 enemy ships sunk, 300 planes destroyed. But when the truth came in, the result was catastrophic. American losses, 89 aircraft. Japanese losses, 329, and nearly every remaining veteran pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few to survive, wrote later, "It wasn't combat. It was extermination." Hellcats dominated every altitude, every direction, every fight. Operation Ago, Japan's last hope for a decisive victory. 9 carriers. 450 aircraft. The best they had left. Against them, Task Force 58. 15 carriers. Nearly 1,000 aircraft. Half of them Hellcats. American radar picked up the Japanese 150 miles away. Hellcats climbed to intercept, perfectly positioned. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the escort, saw them waiting, 60 dark shapes glinting in the sun. "They were stacked above us like a wall of steel," he wrote. The battle lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese planes, 42 were shot down. By the end of the day, 346 Japanese aircraft were gone. American losses, 30. The pilots of Task Force 58 called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. For Japan's air arm, it was the beginning of the end. Dawn over the Philippine Sea. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched what little he had left, 116 aircraft, many flown by teenagers. From the carriers of Task Force 38, Hellcats lifted off into the orange haze. Their engines thundered like the drums of war. In less than an hour, radar screens filled with dots, Japanese aircraft closing fast. The radio crackled, "Bogies inbound, bearing 085, Angels 15. The first engagement was over before it began. Hellcats dove from 20,000 feet, guns blazing. The Japanese pilots tried to turn, tried to climb, but the Hellcats were faster, heavier, untouchable. Commander David McCampbell, flying Mincy 3, scored 9 kills in one sortie, a record that still stands. "They just kept coming," McCampbell said later. But they couldn't fight. By sunset, 257 Japanese planes lay scattered across the sea. Only 30 returned. The Imperial Navy had entered the battle with air power, and left without it. The next morning, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi faced the wreckage of his air groups. He knew the truth: Japan could no longer win in the air. "There is only one way left," he said. "To turn our pilots into bombs." The kamikaze was born, not from fanaticism, but from despair. Hellcat pilots began encountering planes that didn't evade, didn't dogfight, they dove straight at ships. Lieutenant Alex Vracia described his confusion. "They didn't even try to shoot back. Just came at us like meteors." The Hellcats tore them apart mid-dive, but some still hit their targets. Explosions ripped through decks. Every kamikaze that got through was a scar. But every one destroyed was a symbol of a nation fighting its own extinction. By early 1945, Japan's airfields were silent graveyards. Fuel was rationed to a few gallons per week. Factories were rubble. New aircraft were built from wood and canvas. The once mighty Zero now fought alongside crude Ki-43 Oscars and trainer planes converted for suicide missions. Admiral Igaki wrote in his diary, "We are building wings for ghosts." Meanwhile, on the decks of American carriers, Hellcats lined up in endless rows. In 2 years, over 12,000 Hellcats had rolled off Grumman's assembly lines, the most successful naval fighter in history. Every replacement came faster, stronger, more reliable. Where Japan's pilots dwindled, America's multiplied. As B-29s roared over Tokyo, the Hellcats flew escort, cutting down the few interceptors Japan could still launch. One pilot, Ensign Bill Densham, recalled, "You could see the glow of Tokyo from 100 miles away." The defenders came, a handful of Zeros, Ki-61 Tonys, Ki-84 Franks, desperate, scattered, doomed. They had courage, Densham said. But they had no chance. By dawn, 100,000 people lay dead. The Zero, the once invincible samurai of the sky, had become a relic, burned out against the Hellcats' dominance. April 1945, Okinawa. The Japanese threw everything left in the empire into the air, 1,900 kamikazes, 400 conventional aircraft. The Americans countered with radar pickets and combat air patrols of Hellcats, 24-hour airborne guards circling every fleet. The results were brutal. Hellcats claimed 2,400 kills over Okinawa, often destroying kamikazes miles before they reached the ships. But the cost was heavy. Even with radar, even with skill, hundreds of suicide planes broke through. The carriers Bunker Hill and Enterprise were hit. Thousands died. Hellcat pilot Ensign Harry McClure wrote in his log, "They were kids. You could see their faces as they came in. I'll never forget that." The sky over Okinawa was victory painted in tragedy. By August, Japan had no air force left to fight. Hellcats now escorted bombers not in fear, but in ceremony. The sky belonged entirely to them. On August 15, Emperor Hirohito's voice echoed over a silent nation, "The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage." For the men who had once believed themselves invincible in the Zero, it was unthinkable. Saburo Sakai, now one of the last surviving aces, wept as he listened to the broadcast, "We had believed we were the wings of the Emperor. We died believing that." When the war ended, historians began to ask, how had the world's most feared air force fallen so quickly? The answer wasn't courage. Japan had that in endless supply. It was adaptation. The Zero was a masterpiece, but it was built for a world that no longer existed. The Hellcat was built for the war as it became, brutal, industrial, relentless. It had armor, radios, radar support, production scale, and tactics that evolved faster than any enemy could counter. Grumman engineers called the Hellcat the Wildcat with a college education. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't elegant. But it worked, everywhere, against everything. By war's end, Hellcat pilots claimed 5,163 aerial victories, more than any other Allied naval fighter. Its kill ratio? 19 to 1. For every Hellcat lost, 19 enemy planes went down. In the years after 1945, the Hellcat disappeared quietly from service. Jets replaced it, technology moved on, and new wars demanded new machines. But for the men who flew them, and the enemies who faced them, the Hellcat remained something more than metal. It was the symbol of a turning tide, the moment when American industry, technology, and discipline overcame Japan's artistry and spirit. Saburo Sakai later met U.S. Navy ace Eugene Valencia at a reunion. They shook hands, both survivors of a sky that had taken so many. "You fought like a samurai," Valencia told him. "You fought like a machine," Sakai replied. Both were right. In the end, the Hellcat wasn't born to be beautiful. It was born to end a war. And it did. When it first rose from the decks of American carriers, Japan's skies were ruled by men who believed they could not be defeated. By the time it landed again, the Empire's wings had been torn from the heavens. The Hellcat didn't just win air battles. It changed the very meaning of air power, from art to science.